Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30. I know we have a couple people who are still drifting in, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to budgeting, everybody. So first thing on the agenda is actually to do elections for our officers for this next budget cycle. So hopefully you all saw my email that I'm hoping to continue as your chair for another season cycle. So in order for that to happen, then we do need to vote on that. So if there's anyone who would like to move to nominate me for that position. Okay, well, great. Thank you.
I'll second that nomination.
Okay, thank you very much. So all in favor, please say aye.
Madam Chair?
Oh, more nominations. Good, yes.
I would like to nominate Ken Beeson.
Super. Okay, great, perfect. So nomination for me and nomination for Ken Beeson. Is there a second for Ken?
Second.
Okay, super. So now we will have discussion. Ken, would you like to share some thoughts first?
Okay, I will. I was going to share some thoughts about being vice chair, so I'll share my thoughts. I'll talk a little bit about who I am briefly and why I might be interested in this. I can say I'm honored that I would be nominated for this and glad to be considered. As some of you know, I'm retired from eWeb, about 30 years experience there on the utility operation side. And I'm interested in public issues. I'm interested in governance. I'm interested in the budget process and the financing process and doing this work that we've been engaged in. I'm starting my 4th year on the Budget Committee. I'm also a member of the Human Services Commission. It's appointed by the council. I also, working with my daughter and my wife, I help to operate a nonprofit out of Eugene that helps kids in Nepal. I guess I'd say Eugene is my home, and I'm interested in giving back to the community. In terms of what I could contribute, I have the experience on the Budget Committee, and I think with that I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of the responsibility and the roles of the chair, both the chairperson and the vice chair. I have in my work life and also in my nonprofit life, I have experience in putting agendas together, setting those agendas, working with boards, and helping to manage meetings. I also believe I'm able to effectively represent the Budget Committee out in the community. In the past year or so, I've had occasion to do that both with the media and in some public meetings. I think I have a good working relationship with many of the city staff. I guess I'd say I've got the time, the commitment, the energy. I have the interest and want to help work with you all on these issues we're engaged in. I believe in the value of public participation. I think the Budget Committee work exemplifies that. So that would be my brief speech to you all. I'd appreciate any consideration.
Great, thank you. Would it be valuable for me to share some similar thoughts? I know I've been, okay, perfect, I'll do that.
Fair.
So I joined the Budget Committee probably about the same time Ken did, so that would be about 4 years ago, for 2 reasons. One is I wanted to see our community continue to be strong and grow stronger. And the budget process, to me, is really about our priorities and how we as citizens have a chance to influence those priorities and to represent the priorities that we see and hear from our fellow citizens, and to make sure that citizen voices are heard in that process. And it's an important way that the city looks at policy choices and decisions. And so that's why I joined the Budget Committee. I also have a business background and felt that it was a part of the city where I could actually bring some of my skills and background and put them to use. So just so I don't know how many of you know professionally, so I have sort of 2 roles right now. I am the Vice President of Marketing for Salco Community Credit Union part of the time. And part of the time, I have my own business where I do marketing and strategic consulting for other companies, some of which are in Eugene and some of which are elsewhere in the Pacific Northwest. So that's my professional life, and in those roles, I look at budgets and manage budgets, but I also spend a lot of time facilitating processes with other people, which is a lot of listening and a lot of bringing people together and a lot of hopefully having dialogue that helps groups move forward. I think that's a lot of what we did last year through, I think, a very challenging cycle and process, and I certainly learned a lot doing that. I not only got to know each of you better, I think I got to know the community much better, as well as learning about sort of effective processes for helping both the community and this team come together around some actual solutions to move us forward as a community. So again, I was a little burned out, as I said frankly in my email at the end of last cycle. It was an unusual year last year. And so had said that I wanted to step down, and having some time away from it, I realized that there are pieces of this that I really, really enjoy, and so was interested in continuing. So that's my experience and background. Okay, so are there any other nominations or comments? Yes, Will.
What, I just want to know so you have 1 year remaining.
On the budget committee?
In the term, yeah.
I think that's right. I think, yes. Mhm.
Ken?
I have 3 years.
You have 3 years remaining.
Yes.
So, Ken, would you be amenable to vice chair for a year and then transitioning into the chair role potentially next year?
I am. I'm interested in any role where I can help.
And Ken actually is one of the people, along with Chelsea and Josh, who had indicated an interest already in the vice chair position. So that, I know Ken is interested in, as well as a couple other people. Any other questions? Discussion?
Call the vote.
Okay, we will call a vote. All those in favor of Ken Beeson as chair for this coming term? Okay, great. All in favor of Laura Illig for this coming term, say aye. Okay, thank you. So I will thank you for your confidence, and I will continue as your chair for this budget cycle. And now we will talk about the vice chair position. And as I mentioned, there are 3 people who indicated an interest in serving as vice chair. So I emailed them and told them that I would like them each to take a couple of minutes. Obviously, hopefully, Ken, your couple minutes. You've already spoken to the chair position, but we'll give you a chance if you want to say something about vice chair that's different. Each to have a couple minutes to just speak a little bit about their background and why they'd be interested in serving in this capacity. So Chelsea, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So good evening. I'm a little sick. Sorry. I'm going to try and pretend I can hear. It's been an honor to serve on this committee the past 3 years, and now my 4th year. I'm really excited about this new term, and I'm really interested in being part of the leadership team of the Budget Committee. I thought I'd frame why I started on the Budget Committee first. My husband and I moved here in the middle of the recession, about 2009, so that I could go to graduate school to study economics at the University of Oregon, and we fell in love with this community really quickly, and we wanted to stay. We saw tons of opportunity. We also saw some challenges, and we wanted to know how we could get involved to make this a great place for us to live long term. So the Budget Committee seemed like a great fit for me to find a way to represent young professionals like myself in this community, to really have a voice at the table in the city. I found this experience to be amazing, really. It's been a great opportunity. It's been eye-opening to see how all the city services connect to each other, but also into our community. And it's been sort of heartbreaking over the last few years to see, like, if you pull one domino out of that, the reach of that ripple throughout our community. But it's also been inspiring in terms of helping me see that there are so many ways to get involved. I'm now really involved in my neighborhood association and on the library advisory board, and it's just been great in that respect. One thing I've really appreciated over the last few years is Laura and Mark's leadership and ability to really frame our conversations from those broad conversations that we need to have at the beginning of each year, but then narrowing us down so that we can get our budget recommendation out on time to those values discussions that we tend to wind up at every year. And I've also really appreciated how they framed our discussion with the community, particularly last year, so that we had usable feedback that we could actually use in our budget process. So I want to be vice chair because I really want to be a part of that leadership team. I have the experience here to understand that those needs for those broad and narrower conversations. I've developed that strategic thinking while being on this committee to think through how we should go through this process. And I'm really just passionate about this community, and I think the budget process is one way we can make this community a better place to live for everyone who lives in Eugene. So thanks for your consideration.
So I think officially we need a nomination and a second. So is anyone willing to nominate? Okay, I'll have Marty will nominate and Jill will second. So you have officially been nominated for this position. Ken, why don't you, if you have any other comments to add, and then I'll let there be a nomination for you as well. Do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
I don't think I have anything
Okay.
to add. I think I gave my comment.
Okay, perfect. Would anyone like to nominate? Okay, is there a second? Okay, perfect. So Ken has also been nominated. And Josh, do you have any comments?
Actually, when I will make a 12-second withdrawal speech because when I responded, it wasn't obvious that other people had stepped in. I've served in a leadership position on a board or commission previously and take it seriously. So,
Okay.
But these people actually warrant your attention.
Wonderful.
Unlike me.
Okay, great. So we have 2 nominations and seconds, and I think we've had some great comments from both of you. Is there any further discussion before we move to a vote? No? Okay. All those in favor of Chelsea Clinton for budget chair, please say aye. Okay. 1. Okay, great. All those in favor of Ken Beeson? Okay. Ken will be our vice chair. Welcome aboard. Thank you, and thank you, Chelsea, for stepping up, and thank you for stepping up and saying you're interested in serving. That's what we need for the community, and much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we have our chair and vice chair for this coming cycle, and we will now move to minutes approval. In your packet, there were minutes from many meetings. Hopefully you had a chance to read them. And I wanted to see first, were there any recommended changes, any comments?
Move for approval?
Okay, move for approval. Is there a second? Second, okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as submitted?
Aye.
Okay. Any nays? Same sign? No? Okay. Motion passes unanimously. Minutes are approved. And now we will move to the public comment section of the evening for the public comment on the Capital Improvement Program 2016 to 2021. So thank you, community members who have joined us this evening. Before you begin, I just want to make sure everyone understands our process. So each of you will have 3 minutes to speak. And what I'll do is I will say the name of the person who's going to speak first, as well as the name of the person who will be next, so that you can get ready and know that you'll be next. Please come up to this table where you'll have the chance to speak for 3 minutes. And there will be a timer here that you can see that will show you how your time is progressing, so you know when you need to conclude your remarks. Finally, we ask that the audience, anyone out here who is in the room, please just hold your applause. It's just fair and makes everyone feel more comfortable if we can let everyone's comments be heard. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. And the first community member that we have this evening is Alexis Biddle, who will be followed by Janice Howard.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Alexis Biddle, and I'm a law student here at the University of Oregon and also a master's in planning student. But for the purposes of my comments tonight, it's more important that I'm a person who bikes. I bike every day to get to and from the university and around town. And I know that this committee discusses a broad variety of budget issues, and what I'm here to talk about is a very small one compared to your task. But I'd like to encourage all of you to prioritize funding the 13th Avenue protected bike lanes. I think that project in particular is very important for the safety of students and members of the community at large. And that it also would be a key component in establishing our community as a leader in the next generation of what modern bike facilities look like, and what a community that really is doing what we have already committed to do with reducing our carbon emissions through the carbon reductions ordinance, through allowing people to choose the better options for transporting themselves to and from work and their daily activities. Cities like Copenhagen have 20 to 30% of their trips taken via bicycle. Our community is between 6 and 7%, and I think we could do a lot better. So that's why I support this project, and I know there's a lot of other issues you're working on, but I think that's really important.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we have Janice Howard, who will be followed by Misha English.
Good evening. My name is Janice Howard. I am a longtime volunteer dog walker through Green Hill, but at the First Avenue Public Shelter that serves as the animal control facility. A group of dedicated walkers have assisted me in submitting an online letter to request respectfully allocation for funding to consider building a new public shelter. The current shelter is very crowded, stressful, has very stressful conditions for all of our animals, particularly our dogs, and I wanted to just make you aware of some of the current conditions that staff and volunteers alike are facing at the First Avenue shelter on West First Avenue. As a person who trains new walkers, we always stress a number of safety issues in getting these dogs out of their kennels. There are 30 kennels, 2 rows of 15. They're concrete, fairly noisy most of the time. And in the winter particularly, there's an added stressor of keeping these dogs warm enough on frigid nights. The heating system is outdated, the radiant heat tends to rise, and the dogs are sleeping obviously on beds on the flooring, so it can be quite cold at times and drafty. Some particular safety issues that present challenges for us are getting the dogs out of their back kennel safely and past all of the other dogs on the way out of the building through a very narrow entryway where we pass staff members, other volunteers, and also members of the public who are coming in considering to adopt these shelter animals. There's really not a place where they can have a chance to visit quietly, to have a conversation with staff, or to meet with dogs that they're particularly interested in. Once off the shelter property, the dogs can begin to relax and the walkers get to know them. We have implemented a behavior modification program to try to increase adoptable behaviors for these animals and to reduce shelter stress. As a psychologist, this training is very near and dear to my heart and fits with skill sets that I believe that I have. We've seen lots of improvement in the dogs we work with, but when we go into a kennel, often we set off the other dogs who react and want attention from us as well. So it can be a challenging environment to work in. We really want to continue to do this work and believe that a more modern shelter with quiet environments and quieter kennels will help reduce the stress and increase adoptability and help the overall quality of life for the staff and volunteers and the animals who reside there. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. All right, and now we have Misha English.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Misha Dunlap English, and I've been a resident of Eugene, Lane County for nearly 30 years. I completed my undergrad and did my JD at the University of Oregon. Practiced law for several years in Eugene and have owned several businesses here as well. I've been a volunteer at the First Avenue Shelter, formerly LCAS, for over 3 years with over 700 hours of service during that time. A letter signed by many longtime volunteers of the shelter has been submitted to the committee detailing the inhumane conditions inherent in the current facility. I trust the committee has received and read said letter, and such I would like to expound upon a few of the details contained within it. Beginning over 13 years ago, Lane County Board of Commissioners assembled task forces that have studied and issued formal reports on the woeful inadequacies of the First Avenue shelter. A primary concern of both task forces was the fact that the facility built now nearly 40 years ago was too overcrowded and too outdated to be considered workable or humane. Rather than reinvent the wheel, I would like to read from one of those reports at this time. Please keep in mind that this was written in 2003, and as of 2015, the building has the exact same footprint and the exact same interior dog kennel capacity as when the report was written 12 years ago. Quote, presently there are only 30 kennels available for dogs. This number is further reduced by court-mandated impounds. Kennel needs are further exacerbated by animals held in quarantine, animals held as evidence for pending adjudication, animals held during investigations of animal abuse or neglect cases, and other emergency retentions. The report goes on to identify, quote, the immediate need for 30 new kennels, and further states, quote, that a subsequent second addition of 30 kennels for a total of 60 additional kennels will accommodate surges in impounds. Pressures on the limited capacity of the shelter continue to increase because not only does this community have twice the number of people since the 1970s when the shelter was built, but the number of animals on average in each household has likely tripled per a 2012 HSUS report. So with all these additional animals and no additional space, how is the shelter managing? Well, it's not. Even with the creation of many small rescue groups, dedicated foster parents, pet of the week spots, better spay and neuter education, more spay and neuter vouchers, et cetera, there are still too many animals coming through the front door of the First Avenue shelter. The rule rather than the exception over the past few years is the shelter is over capacity by 5 to 10 dogs, but I personally worked at the shelter on several occasions when there were well over 40 dogs being housed at that location. So how are they managing? Shelter staff resort to one of the following actions when the temperature is too low to house dogs outside or too hot. They double up animals, a practice generally discouraged for safety and health reasons. They house dogs in staff lunchroom or front offices. They put dogs in small dogs in crates overnight, which means that these dogs are in the crates for 13 hours or more. Sometimes they're in those crates for days on end, not getting out except for occasional potty breaks since there's nowhere else for them to go. And 4, staff take dogs home overnight. Let me be very clear here. May I finish?
You can have one more concluding sentence.
My presentation to the committee tonight is in no way a criticism of Green Hill administration or staff. Please don't allow the plight of these poor creatures to be overlooked again. Thank you.
All right. I don't believe we have any other community members who signed up to speak, so thank you of you for coming tonight to share your thoughts with us. And now we will hear from the city manager, I believe, about the budget outlook. Is that right, Jim? Thank you.
Don't mind, I'll use the whiteboard. I'll give you the punchline first. The good news is there's no gap that we're working on for the other real positive. As you know, from the past 6 years, there's been a gap that all of you predecessors have done a lot of hard work. And the good thing, part of that is because of that hard work, the strategies have really gotten us to a place where we currently have a stable budget. So I want to describe what that means, and then I'll just give that a little brief history of where we've been for the last 6 years, for everybody, just kind of a reminder, and then as we go forward, you can think about where we go. You might remember, really starting back at the beginning of the recession, there were a couple of pieces in play. Prior to the recession, the budget was actually $1 million out of balance, or there was an initial $1 million gap. I won't be able to repeat that same thing. But we initially had a $1 million gap, and this was way back because we're talking about 2008.
You're on.
Yeah, it's on.
On? Okay. $1 million gap. There was also a policy decision that had been made by the city council to absorb the library levy into the general fund, and that was about a $5 million levy that had to be absorbed into the general fund. So that was an additional $5 million. And then, as you remember, the recession hit, so the economy flattened. Probably the big data point for us was Hynex closed back in 2000, 2008, 2009. 1,200 jobs, a significant amount of property tax and silt revenue coming from eWeb for that. So the recession hits, which created, among other things, some significant PERS increases that we're going to have to anticipate in the forecast period. The initial part, for those that were around back then, we had this $12 million gap that we had to fill early on. And so we started off with a $12 million gap, and as you know, by the time we got through last year,
the total gap that has been filled is $30 million. And now we're talking about general fund, and we talk about general fund because that's where the discretionary dollars are. To give you some context for that, the general fund is plus or minus $125 million, and so over this accumulated period of time, the gap has been 20+% of that general fund. And one of the mantras that we have had for this entire time has been don't use one-time money for ongoing expenses. And that really has helped, because what we've done is we've actually eliminated this $30 million of ongoing expenses, which now enables us to have a stable budget. And when we talk about a stable budget, and we have been for the last many years, it's been where our revenues and expenditures, our revenues over the forecast period are greater than our expenditures, equal to or greater than our expenditures, and we have a reasonable and responsible reserve. The amount that we've benchmarked against is 8%. We haven't been there in the past, but that's what our goal has been. And so right now, as we look at FY16, our revenues and expenditures over that forecast period, our revenues are greater than or equal to the expenditures over that time. And as we move through the forecast period, our savings account, or our reserves, starts to approach between 3 and 4%. So we're starting to actually get in a good direction for our reserves, as well as maintaining stability. And what we mean by stability in this case is what we can afford is our current suite of services that we currently provide right now, plus we've added back in the Sheldon branch as an ongoing cost. You might remember the Budget Committee and eventually the Council for the Sheldon branch library said it's one-time dollars to get us through this year. What we've said is let's see what happens if we add that back in as an ongoing expense. And so we have our current suite of services, our current portfolio. We've added in that Sheldon branch as an ongoing expense. And then what we've also said is through these last 6 years, there have been several of our additional savings account, fleet fund, our technology ISD fund, some of those, in order to help balance our budget, they've been managing their reserves, and essentially a portion of their reserves have been decreasing as well. And so what we've said is let's stop the bleeding out of those reserves as well. And so that has stopped. And so that's what we mean by we don't have a gap. We can provide our current suite of services, fund the Sheldon branch, stop the bleeding out of these other funds, start building. We want to be at 8%, but we start building towards a 3+% reserve through the forecast period. So that's good news. And so what that I think allows us to do collectively is, unlike in the last 6 years where we've always had to say, okay, what don't we want? What we can start looking towards the future is what are the service outputs, or what are some of our best outcomes around parks maintenance? We had some of that conversation today in council, or the library of the future, or facilities, or recreation, and some of those kinds of things. Now, there isn't excess dollars in the current year's budget to now start funding a sustainable budget. We've talked about stable versus where we want to start talking about and thinking about is a sustainable budget, which really is how do we ensure that we provide the parks maintenance that we want to provide, or facilities maintenance, or what does the library of the future look like, and how do we start identifying those and moving in those directions. Part of the conversations you've had in the past around revenues, some of those could be funded through new revenues if you choose, but I think the conversation can be different than what we've had in the last several years. We can say, we're stable, now let's start talking about where we want to be with different things. So, make sense? Questions, thought on that?
Hooray.
So that is good news. So might be able to have fewer meetings, which is also good. So
That was pretty fast, is that it? Okay, thank you.
Good news
There
is
you
good.
go.
Good news always comes across as well on it.
Thank you. So now we have a couple of staff presentations on this draft. So, Lila, are you starting us out? Thank you.
I know. So, there we go. So I'm Twyla Miller. I'm the Acting Budget and Analysis Manager here at the city. And tonight I'll be providing a brief overview of the Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 16 through fiscal years 21, so the CIP. So the draft CIP is a complete listing of the capital projects the city plans on constructing over the next 6 years. The document is developed to provide a balanced program for capital improvements over this time period by taking into consideration adopted plans from throughout the organization, input from various stakeholders, and the anticipated funding available within the 6-year time period. The CIP also includes many unfunded projects over this time period in order to document the unfunded needs of the organization, so that as grant opportunities and other resources become available over time, there's a comprehensive list for staff reference. And finally, the FY16 and FY17 projects with funding secured and funding identified status do become the basis for the capital budget for the next 2 years. The Budget Committee and the Council will review and possibly modify the CIP, which when adopted will become the capital budget that will be part of the proposed budget you will see later this spring. So the capital projects that are included in the CIP come from a variety of sources. Previously, I mentioned plans and stakeholder input, but projects can also be directed by the City Council, and many projects are also the result of grant funding. Projects can also be developed in response to external mandates by other government entities and public requests such as the automated car wash at the Eugene Airport that was requested by and is paid for by rental car companies. So funding for projects in the CIP are in 3 categories shown here. Funding secured are projects with secured or dedicated funding, such as street bonds or federal aviation funding. Funding identified are those projects with a very high likelihood of having available funding. Often we know we will receive funding, but there's an uncertainty about the timing of receipt of those funds, such as is the case with projects funded by grants or systems development charges, SDCs. We know we will receive those SDC payments or revenues, but there's uncertainty about the timing of the receipt of the cash flows over the period. And then finally, there's funding not identified. These are projects with no funding source available in the 6-year time period. This category has had the greatest change from the last version of the CIP, as the level of this category has doubled. And this is primarily due to 2 factors. One is, as we've gone through the economic downturn, we have deferred projects and maintenance. And then also what John was talking about earlier, this category in this CIP also includes additional projects as we begin to plan for returning to a more sustainable level. So this includes things like community centers and branch libraries. So funding for the CIP comes from a variety of sources, as you see here. The vast majority of these sources are restricted for a particular purpose by local, state, or federal laws and regulations associated with the funding source, such as federal aviation funding, which can only be used for airport projects. Because of the restrictions associated with most of the CIP funding sources, there's no across-the-board prioritization for projects. Instead, projects are prioritized within each funding category based on a variety of factors depending on the category. And then finally, the funding source that is not restricted is the general capital projects category shown here, which is primarily funded through a transfer from the general fund each year. The projects funded with this transfer are the capital preservation projects for public buildings and facilities which do not qualify to use other designated funding sources you see here.
And then this chart is just showing the CIP projects by category. As you can see, over 60% of the projects are in two categories. The transportation category, which is primarily comprised of the pavement preservation program, and then also the airport projects. So the city prepares a draft CIP every other year, and staff have been working on the CIP throughout the fall and early winter. The draft document was published and distributed in late January with public outreach through neighborhood and council newsletters, as well as a budget interested parties list, which occurred at the same time so that interested citizens can be informed and provide input to this body and also to the council. The Planning Commission has also requested a review of the CIP, and staff will be making a presentation at their February 23rd meeting. Once the CIP is adopted this March, it will become the basis for the capital budget, as I said before, that will be part of the city manager's proposed budget later this spring. And now I'll turn things over to Mark to talk about Public Works.
Okay. Thank you, Twyla.
Sure.
Mark Schoening with Public Works Engineering. I'm the city engineer. And Public Works manages the following projects for the airport, parks and open space, stormwater, transportation, and wastewater. And starting with the airport, this is a graph we've shown every CIP, and it shows the total revenue claimants per year. And you can see that since the end of the recession, they continue to grow, and they grow at about 4 to 6% annually. The capital projects for the airport are outlined and structured by the Eugene Airport Master Plan and the 5-year Federal Aviation Administration Capital Improvement Plan. And these documents provide for the plan development of the airport and facilities. Project priorities are determined through a process based upon the master plan and FAA approval and are vetted through the Airport Advisory Committee. This is a view of the terminal expansion, exterior perspective, and that will include, we'll focus on several areas including security screen checkpoint, B gate hold room, A gate concourse, and the baggage claim area, with the goal of easing congestion and improving functionality for passengers. The total cost is estimated at $16.8 million, with funding from the Federal Aviation Administration Airport Improvement Program grants, passenger facility charges, and airport revenue. The first phase was budgeted in fiscal year 14 at $6.1 million, and project completion and commissioning is targeted for fiscal year 17. In addition to the terminal expansion, the first 2 years of the airport capital improvement projects include replacement of a jet bridge, terminal building exit lane monitoring structures, and significant airport preservation projects. And as Twyla mentioned, a new energy efficient and environmentally friendly car wash facility will be constructed for the car rental companies. And then finally, an update of the airport master plan is budgeted in the first year of the CIP. And this shows the revenue sources for the airport. The majority of the funding comes from the FAA grants, passenger facility charges, and customer facility charges. The FAA grants include both an entitlement fund and a discretionary fund. And level of available discretionary funds are subject to congressional legislation and also subject to the prioritization process of the FAA. And then finally, the balance of the funding comes from the Municipal Airport Fund, which is derived from airport parking fees, terminal rents, fees from other operations. And then moving on to parks and open space. So this is a...
for just a minute. Will,
we have a question on the airport first. So,
however you want to, do you want to go all the way through, or?
Do you want to just go ahead and, can we finish the presentation, and then can you just make a note of your question, and we'll do that at the end? I think that's probably easier.
Totally fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to parks and open space. This is a before and after, before on the left, after on the right, of the renovation of State Street Park, which was completed in 2010 and was funded 100% from the reimbursement component of park system development charges. The play area was renovated because the equipment was old and inadequate and substandard. Much of the original equipment had been previously removed due to safety issues and age. And there was also drainage issues which caused the bark chips to decay faster and prevented use of the park during wet weather.
So due to the increasing gap between available operation and maintenance funding and the maintenance needs of our growing inventory of parks and open space assets, the current parks and open space portion of the CIP is focused on renovation of existing parks and the acquisition of new park sites and open space. And currently the backlog for renovation projects is estimated at $20 million. This is one of the acquisition sites. So this is a future site of the Santa Clara Community Park. We've acquired 35 acres to date and are in the process of working with property owners to acquire an additional 20 acres. We're not planning to do any park development or even begin the planning for park development until we resolve the issue of ongoing operation and maintenance funding for the parks. For some of our acquisitions, we're now partnering with the Trust for Public Lands because they provide us additional resources in coordinating acquisitions, and they also provide us with a non-public face to work with property owners, a non-governmental face to work with property owners that may have concerns with working with the government. So that the Trust for Public Lands has helped us on several acquisitions. And then finally in the parks, this is the future site of the Riverfront Urban Park that would be part of the EWEB Master Plan development on the riverfront. And this is funded in the first 2 years of the CIP, and it's the one park development project we're moving forward with. This is the source of funding for parks projects, the majority of it coming from parks SDCs. And we used that for acquisition of open space, and the reimbursement component of parks SDCs is used, as I mentioned, on the State Street project. A lot of it's used for renovation of existing assets. And as Twyla mentioned, the other component is the other large piece is the General Capital Projects Fund, which is general fund, and that's used mostly on renovation projects as well. Some of the unfunded projects in the system are trail development, neighborhood park development, and development of additional water play features. On the stormwater side, this is a picture of Amazon Creek, a project we completed last summer downstream of Chambers, between Chambers and Garfield, which is approximately 1,900 linear feet, and it was $1.2 million total cost. And it was to deal with some of the erosion and head cutting on that and a lot of the water quality issues along that stretch of the river. So this is what it looks like when it was completed prior to the landscaping. So this was at the end of the summer, and then over the course of the fall and winter, we've put in 14,000 plants and trees along that stretch. So this is Amazon Creek is one of our focus areas in the stormwater CIP. We had developed worked with the Corps of Engineers and the City of Springfield in a federally funded Metro Waterways study, but that plan slowed down to the point where Springfield and Eugene decided to go forward on their own without the Corps of Engineers because it didn't appear that federal funding or even completing the studies was going to happen with that partnership. So we've moved, both of our City of Eugene and Springfield have moved on to implement some of the projects and the work that was done in that study on our own. And the source of stormwater capital funds are primarily the stormwater utility fees and stormwater SDCs. And the focus of our projects, in addition to the restoration of Amazon Creek, is our projects that focus on rehabilitation of the existing stormwater system, and then elimination of some of the dry wells or infiltration facilities across the city that have long-term maintenance issues because they tend to plug and cause flooding, and they also are problematic in areas with high groundwater, both from functionality and also the impacts to the quality of groundwater. On the transportation side, this is a project that was completed last summer on Hughes and Echo Hollow. It was funded with the local gas tax, which brings in about $3 million annually. It was removing 3 inches of pavement and removing 2 inches of pavement and putting back 3 in a process called milling and an overlay, and it cost about $650,000. This is another paving project that was funded with the 2012 pavement bond measure to fix street. It's work on 43rd, North Shasta Loop, and Furland. And this photo shows, and this project was completed last summer at a cost of $1.3 million. And it was a combination of a pavement overlay and this process, which is called full depth reclamation, where the road is essentially recycled in place. So the existing asphalt is, is milled off, and that can be recycled into new asphalt. The base rock and a portion of the subgrade are then essentially rototilled with a cement paste or slurry and create a new road base, a new cement-treated base, which provides the strength, and the asphalt is placed back on top of that. So that reduces a tremendous amount of use of virgin material and also a lot of truck trips hauling out the old material and bringing in new material. And then the other component of the 2012 pavement bond measure to fix streets was $516,000 annually was allocated for pedestrian and bicycle improvements, and those projects are identified through the pedestrian and bicycle master plan, city staff, and then also with working with our bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. So this is it's called a hawk signal at the intersection of 30th and University that provides a safe pedestrian crossing. Camas Ridge Elementary is to the left, and then you can see the LTD bus stop in the upper left at the corner as well. So it provides a safe access for pedestrians across 30th Avenue. The transportation funding, a good share of it comes from the 2012 bond measure, and the local gas tax. Pavement preservation funding also comes from the reimbursement component of transportation SDCs, and the other various funding sources. The wastewater and stormwater component of this portion of the capital projects is we budget those in the transportation fund to get in the transportation program, and that facilitates rehabilitating wastewater and stormwater systems that are on streets that are going to be paved, so that work gets done before the paving does. And then we also coordinate that paving work with EWEB on water projects and Northwest Natural on gas projects. So we're getting all of that underground utility work done in advance of our paving projects. So we're planning 3 or 4 years out now for some of that work. In addition to paving, we do more than just paving, but there's 3 in the CIP. There's 3 bicycle and pedestrian projects that are moving forward through the state transportation improvement program for funding, and that includes the Jessen shared use path on Jessen Street from Terry to Beltline, the Amazon Active Corridor project, and then the Northeast Livable Streets project, which formalizes the bike boulevards in the Harlow, Northeast, and Calyoung neighborhoods. And then finally on wastewater, this capital program focuses primarily on rehabilitation of the existing system, and the goal of that is to reduce the amount of stormwater that inflows into the system and groundwater that infiltrates into the system, because the inflow of stormwater and the infiltration of groundwater takes the capacity of both the collection system and then puts a demand on the treatment plant as well. So in this process, a resin impregnated liner is pulled into the existing stormwater pipe, there's a manhole right behind that gentleman's picture, and then hot water is circulated through that liner, and it catalyzes the resin, and that forms a brand new plastic pipe inside the existing pipe. And then there's a machine that goes inside that and cuts the openings for the service laterals that are connected to that from individual properties. So that concludes the wastewater piece, and I'll turn it over to Jeff for the facilities component. I'm sorry. So just quickly, that you can see the majority of the capital program for wastewater is from utility fees, with a small portion from system development charges.
I could do my best to talk about it, but I don't know. All right, I'm Jeff Perry. I'm the facilities director, and I'm here to talk about the CIP for our facilities projects. The city maintains a wide range of public facilities, including parks, community centers, swimming pools, fire and police stations, government office buildings, parking structures, and a library. There are many more as well. This includes 185 buildings with over 2 million square feet. We're also responsible for expanding existing facilities and building new ones. The general fund is the primary source of funding for public buildings and preservation and improvement projects. The fund receives about $4 million each fiscal year for capital improvement projects. This includes $3 million in base funding, approximately $3 million in base funding, and up to an additional $900,000 from beginning marginal working capital. Capital projects are derived from several adopted plans and the facility condition report. Projects are classified into 3 primary categories. That includes facility preservation and maintenance, site and facility improvements, and new capital facilities. Facility preservation and maintenance includes health, safety, and welfare projects, building systems, which are roofing projects, access control, and things like that. And site and facility improvement projects include ADA work and also enhancements to existing facilities, so we make them more functional or operational. And finally, the new capital facilities are large, major projects that are new construction or major renovations. Examples of that are the new police facility at 300 Country Club Road and the City Hall project. And this is a photo of where we work. That's our office in Cheshire, on Cheshire Street in Skinner Street Park, and it's a great office. So, this is an example of a project we worked on recently and used capital dollars. This is the Cuthbert Amphitheater. The band shell, so the copper-colored shell, was deteriorating, and the wood underneath was starting to rot. And so it was a major renovation that took place about a year ago. It was about a $500,000 project. It was almost custom to recover the existing shell. And it was a tightly coordinated project, so it didn't interrupt the operation in any way. So we did it through the winter, and we were up and running by the spring. Facilities also uses capital dollars for energy efficiency projects. This is a photo of on-demand hot water units at Sheldon Pool. We actually had a very large hot water heater that provided hot water to our domestic water, so our showers and sinks and so on. And it failed. The tank failed. It cracked about a year ago. And rather than just replace it, we put in on-demand units that are about 20% more efficient and much easier to replace. So if one goes down, hot water is still provided. We were actually without hot water for a couple weeks until we got this up and running. So facilities gets involved in a lot of efficiency projects like that. Another example is we replaced boilers throughout the city, especially when we ran out of steam heat here a couple years ago, and we went to more efficient boilers, and so other capital projects at work. This is a photo of the lighting project at the Holt Center. We recently upgraded the lighting. The old lighting was up in the rafters, basically, and it wasn't very accessible nor efficient, so we put in more efficient lighting. It's much easier to maintain, and it looks better, to be honest. We also are working on LED lighting retrofit projects right now. We have several in the works, and they'll be happening in FY15 and 16. Other energy efficiency things that facilities uses capital dollars for includes commissioning, which is where we bring in a consultant, an engineer, to take a look at our systems to determine if they're operating efficiently and as specified. A good example of that is the new police facility. After we were in the facility for about a year, we started observing some issues with the HVAC. It was cold in places and not working as we had initially planned. So we brought in a commissioning agent, and they analyzed the entire system and made recommendations on how to to improve that. We're also doing a major retro commissioning project at the Holt Center right now, so we're actually looking at not just the existing functionality of the HVAC system, but also the life of the system, and it's starting to deteriorate. We've had some failures over the last few years, and so we're just taking a look at that to see where we need to be in the future with their heating and cooling. We also have a solar hot water heater project in the works for Amazon Pool. It has, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but there's a hot water heater on the roof of the pool, and we're commissioning that to make sure it works as designed. Facilities also handles a lot of paving projects with capital dollars. We recently repaved Fire Station 9. We paved the fire station drill field, and we have Fire Station 15 in the planning process to repave their site as well. As I kind of made reference to the Holt Center, we have many newer facilities in our inventory, but we also have quite a few facilities that are beginning to age. Holt Center is a great example. It's about 30 years old, and some of those major systems are starting to deteriorate and starting to fail. And obviously, we're doing some commissioning work, but we also have done boiler replacement at the site. Some major HVAC repairs, ADA improvements. We replaced the stage floor about a year ago, and we did some exterior envelope improvements to improve the efficiency of the building. We're also working with Parks and Open Space and Recreation on their system planning work, and so you'll see a theme today, but there's a lot of recreation facilities in my presentation, and that's because many of those are about 60 years old. They were all built in the same era, actually similar to City Hall, and so we're at that point where they need to be, renovated significantly or replaced. And so we're in the process of working with Parks and Open Space and Recreation on that work, and there will probably be some consulting work done to take a look at our facilities and do some master planning work and so on. All right, sorry about that. Probably the most significant project we have right now is City Hall. Everyone's seen the deconstruction going on 8th Street, hopefully. The goals of that project include a high energy efficiency design, accessible and inclusive to the public, simple and flexible and adaptable in the future. It's going to be, the current design is 4 stories. The building will be situated on the west side of the block. And the initial scope is to house City Council and the City Manager's office. The deconstruction process is currently underway. We actually, this week, will be completely finished with the interior demolition, and beginning next week will be the exterior demolition. So there will be some serious construction going on, and no wrecking ball. It will be a carefully pulled apart process. And one of the exciting things with the demolition is that we're reusing or recycling 95% of the existing building, and we'll use the concrete as fill, so we won't be hauling it away. The project design, the building design, will be complete by late fall, winter, and construction will occur in 2016. So something to look forward there. This chart represents the funding facilities received for capital projects. And between FY16 and 21, you can see there's about $21 million. This chart represents the funding gap that exists in our current level with our projects. And so the lower bar, the green bar, is the current funding level we receive for preventative maintenance and preservation on the O&M side, so our operations and maintenance sides, plus the funds we use for preservation and maintenance with capital dollars. And that's compared to the recommended level of funding by the Facility Research Council. And And so as you can see, there's about a $2 million gap, and the council recommends 2 to 4% reinvestment based on the value of our inventory, and we currently are at about 1.3%. We've been able to manage that okay because we moved out of City Hall, and that's helped with some of those maintenance issues. It was a heavily, it required a lot of maintenance to maintain that facility. And now that we're out and we're in newer, more efficient buildings, it's a little less demanding. But just ongoing, we really need to, be conscious of the funding levels. And, the recommended is 2 to 4%, and we're below that. And so, it's something to think about in the future when we're funding our facilities projects. I think I had it a little backwards here. And so finally, in the capital improvement plan, you'll see some of the unfunded projects as well, and Peterson Barden's listed in there. And this ties well into the work we're doing with Parks and Open Space and Recreation on their planning work. And we've done a lot of work with the facility. We're currently replacing the roof. We actually think it has 3 roofs on it because they've just been overlaid, and so that's a good example of some of the conditions that we have to deal with. But the facility itself needs a lot of work, but it also functionally is very limited, and so that's one of the things that we need to be thinking about moving forward into the future. And that's what I have.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've got 2 more slides.
Oh, you do? Oh, good.
I'd just like to talk about the multi-year financial plan. Staff does develop this document every 2 years when we develop the CIP. It's a comprehensive inventory of unfunded challenges and opportunities across the organization. And this document is a tool used for strategic thinking and planning as we look toward building a sustainable service system. The MYFP includes unfunded costs not only for capital projects, but also unfunded ongoing operational and maintenance costs for existing facilities, as well as funding shortfalls for city services. The list to the right of the slide highlights several items on the current list. There is some overlap between the CIP and the multi-year financial plan, as many of the unfunded capital projects are in both documents. You received a draft MYFP list with your draft of the CIP when it was mailed out to you, and you will receive a complete plan with detailed project pages later this spring. Please note that on the list there are a couple of placeholder projects with a cost of $1. These are projects that have not yet been developed to the point of having a cost estimate, but are included in the plan because they're a known future need. Placeholder projects are not included in the CIP as they're due to the uncertainty around the scope and the cost of the project. So this next steps in the approval of the CIP. Tonight you'll have a chance to ask questions and have discussion and make a recommendation to the City Council. And then on March 9th, there'll be a public hearing, and the City Council will approve the document, which will then become the basis for the capital budget. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So first, I'd like to open up first any questions that we have, and I'll let you start, Will, since I know that you held your question from a little bit ago.
I'm going to skip that question because it's not as important as a different set of questions. So obviously, there's quite a bit of unfunded stuff in the capital improvement plan, and things that don't have funding probably don't happen. So, and this is something that probably a lot of people in the room know, and as a person who hasn't done a capital improvement plan document before, excuse my ignorance, how does the plan, how do things that are unfunded become funded? How does what prevents us from putting whatever we want in this plan if it's going to remain unfunded, or how does, let's build a skyscraper to the moon, if it's going to be unfunded. So how does the stuff that's here get funded realistically, and how do we prioritize, or what does this really mean? Other than the funded stuff. The funded stuff I understand, but the unfunded stuff is the stuff that I'm confused on. How does that all shake out?
Look, I'll try to answer that. So pavement preservation is a good example because in this budget committee meeting 10 years ago, we weren't doing any pavement preservation, and we showed it as unfunded. But we also showed here's if we had a pavement preservation program that was funded, here's what it would look like and what we should be doing over the course of 6 years. So it wasn't that skyscraper, it was here's what a pavement preservation program looks like. Unfortunately, ours was unfunded. And to date, we've been able to add the local gas tax, 2 bond measures that went out and were successful, and the reimbursement component of our transportation estimate. We haven't fully funded pavement preservation. We're still, I think, $6 million short on an annual basis, but we've made a huge step forward in closing that gap.
You know, I would add some to that, too. One of the positives of where we sit financially with a stable budget, it allows us to pivot really to start talking about unfunded needs. So, for example, I just used the work session that the council had earlier today around parks and open space operations and maintenance. As you even saw on that particular second to the last slide, that is part of an unfunded need, is a certain level of maintenance in our parks. Part of that's occurred over the last several years. As you know, there has been some decrease in the amount of funding for that, so that has impacted our maintenance and operations and maintenance. And so one of the things that the Budget Committee can spend some time on is what, if any, are those unfunded needs. And it may be a conversation that the Budget Committee has, that the Council has, on which tend to be the priorities and how do we want to fund those unfunded needs. And it could be any number of ways to do that if you choose to do that. But I think that's how some of those conversations both get started and come to fruition. Like Mark talked about, pavement preservation has been in conversation for a number of years. There was a point where Budget committees, the council, and eventually the voters said, important enough, we're funding these, what were unfunded needs to go forward.
So for something like the animal shelter to get in this document, unless I missed it, I didn't see it in this.
It's in the multi-year financial plan.
Right.
As a placeholder.
Oh, it's as a $1. Okay, thank you. I was looking through the unfunded list, so that's why it's not there. Okay.
Great. Marty?
Actually, a comment first. No offense to the Airport Advisory Committee. I understand the Federal Aviation Administration rules about, airport money has to be spent at the airport because the FAA pays a lot of those bills. But I think there is some ability to do dual-use facilities. And now that we're expanding the urban growth boundary, maybe, in that direction, there may be some ability to combine things like the fleet maintenance facility, that sort of thing. And actually, a quick question on the car wash. It was phrased something like passenger surcharge or something like that, or consumer surcharge. But to be clear, that's going to be coming strictly from the rental car companies?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure it wasn't on everybody coming and going. Question on the transportation project, the 13th Avenue Active Transportation Corridor. We had a gentleman come and speak about that. It's unfunded. Would you anticipate that you could use the same state funding source that you've used for Amazon Active Transportation Corridor and Northeast Livable Streets?
Right. That'll be an opportunity. We can't unilaterally switch projects.
As we plan for it.
No, but as the state starts that process again, that will be one of our priorities to move that project forward.
Also on transportation, I was going to ask about the railroad quiet zone. I guess we're not so lucky as to have federal matching funds and that sort of thing for that. Is there active planning for that, or is that sort of a placeholder for a future?
I think it's not in the CIP. It's arguably whether it's a transportation project or economic development project.
It's in transportation. It's just not funded. Right. So I didn't.
But there's an upcoming council work session.
Okay.
On
March 9th.
March 9th. Oh, well, great. And finally,
You've already had 3 for. I'll put you in the queue second time around. Okay, thanks. Josh.
Okay, a few quick ones, and I'm not sure if these go here or in future discussion, but just quickly, and these all kind of connect the CIP, the multi-year financial plan, and maybe reserves in different combinations. I'm curious, following on Will's question, where we can see the congruence between the transportation system plan, especially the TSP's unfunded pieces, and the CIP and the total funding picture here. I see the TSP referenced in a bunch of places, and I realize this stuff is maybe progressing in real time, and so it's hard to make it congruent, but I just want to figure out what that is because there's a lot there that's not yet funded. And then also, I'm curious, and apologies if I missed this, but I'm curious how, and Tyler, maybe you spoke to this, how the capital preservation needs that Jeff was going over are part of the multi-year financial plan. And then, because I have to pack this in groups of threes, let me keep going. I have one more. I'm curious where we, in these documents, have a chance to connect these items to the long-term trajectory for reserves. And maybe that belongs outside of this conversation, but I mean, it seems like we're planning both at a scale of dollars and on a time scale where we'd want to sort of understand where we're headed there.
So that's, okay, so.
I'll try the first one.
Okay.
The connection, the incongruence or congruence between the TSP and the...
Let's start with that, and then we can
CIP.
figure out about the other piece, which may be more of a Sue question.
So if you recall the slide from the transportation funding, a majority of that funding is for preservation, which aren't projects that are identified in the transportation system plan. And we're kind of between the trans plan, which is being updated into the transportation system plan, and in the middle of that we had a new pedestrian and bicycle master plan that was accepted by the council, which will be then incorporated into the transportation system plan. So the projects that really came out of the pedestrian and bicycle master plan are those three that I mentioned that we are in the process of securing the state funding for: the Jessen Pass, the Northeast Livable Streets, and the Amazon Corridor. So those aren't projects that were in the existing trans plan. They are projects that were in the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, and hopefully the transportation system plan will get adopted before we get those projects built. But that's so there's not I guess the short answer is most of the CIP is even beyond transportation is maintenance of existing facilities.
So do you want to, can you address the other revenue related, or I'm not quite sure, or Twyla, do you want to, I'm not quite sure who the best person is to answer that.
Hear me? Okay. So one question was around the public buildings and the deficiencies that Jeff was talking about, and that's that you can find that in your multi-year financial plan under public building deferred maintenance. And you can also find it for specific buildings under, for instance, library, recreation, and cultural services. You'll see renovations for various community centers and so on. So some of that stuff is in the multi-year financial plan. And then could you restate your reserve question, because I didn't really entirely understand it.
Well, and it's possible I didn't understand it either, so I'll just be clear about that. What I was asking about is that it seems as if we're looking at these different funding needs over a sufficiently long time, and I'm thinking about your introduction about like where we're going with reserves and our goals there, and chance of clawing back toward 8%. And I'm trying to figure out like where we get to see how those things connect to each other. It's a little bit vague, but I don't quite see that in the multi-year financial plan.
So maybe what you're saying is that if we were saving up over time to pay for some of these renovations, it wouldn't seem like such a big chunk. Is that, and we'd have some reserves that we could then use? Is that what you're asking?
Or that's a nicer way to say it. I mean, like the unfortunate way might be that we are, we might look over in one area as if we're moving toward restoring our reserves, but then actually we're accumulating, a deferred maintenance budget just as fast, and so actually we're not really accumulating reserves because we have this other debit here on the other side.
Right.
So it's really about sort of transparency of comparing those things. It might not be the right question, but
right. No, I think you're right, but we have to do all of those things, right? And that's what the challenge is to try and figure out how to both provide stable funding for our ongoing services, pay for our capital needs, and bring down some of that deferred maintenance over time, and maintain a responsible reserve. We need to do all of those things, and we don't have excess reserves. We actually don't even meet our goals at the moment. So we're trying to do all of those things at once. We're not doing any of them to 100%, but we're working towards that. That's the whole conversation around a sustainable budget.
That help, Josh? Yep. Great, thank you. I put myself in the queue next, and then I'll get Councilor Brown. So my question is actually around our debt load. So if I'm reading this correctly, we've used about 4% of our legal debt capacity for general obligation bonds. And given that rates are really low right now and expected to rise relatively soon, is this a time that we're looking at all about expanding our debt capacity for some strategic initiatives?
We currently don't have any plans to issue debt for any current projects.
And so the city feels that this is the right place to be in terms of our debt load. Is that accurate?
Yes, I mean there's definitely capacity, within our policy limits and the legal limits.
That's how I interpreted that.
Right, but you want to be careful as you look at what projects you might bond, or because you want to maintain a prudent level. The rating agencies do look at what we do, and we have a high bond rating in part due to that low level of debt that we maintain.
Okay. So good. Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. I'm looking at the section of public buildings and facilities, and I'm especially looking at the funding not identified projects. And I noticed that in the 6-year period, a year is chosen with the estimated amount of what it would cost to finish that project is inserted in one of the years. And I realize it's kind of conceptual when you're looking 6 years out, but I'm just wondering if any of them are prioritized. There doesn't seem to be, and maybe they haven't been because it's theoretical, the funding hasn't been identified. The only reason I bring it up is I'm looking specifically, it's on page 120, and I'm looking at the parking structure seismic upgrades. And the estimate is $3.6 million for the overpark and the parkade. And that's slotted for the year 2018. And I'm just wondering, I realize there's so many projects, but I think that's a really important one. The overpark is below life safety standards. And I don't know if it's the role of the budget committee to try to push some of these forward as a hopeful year of 2018, why don't we try to do that in 2017? I realize, funding's not identified, but some of these are, I think maybe could be prioritized. I think this would be one that's, safety issue. So what's my question? I guess my question is, are they just kind of stuck in here as a convenient, we know what the financial requirements are for these projects, and they just kind of put in almost randomly, since the funding has not been identified. The ones where the funding has been identified, that's no problem. Those are all great. We know, yeah, we've got the money, we can go ahead and do this. They are important, every single one of them.
I wouldn't say randomly. That parking structures are enterprise funds, so they're a little different than the capital projects we use with general fund dollars, and so they, we have to prioritize them. Mm-hmm. That's more of a parking fund priority more than a general fund priority. So we have to work with their management on that. But we do prioritize the unfunded projects, I can say, in facilities, and we determine through our condition reports and master planning work which ones we want to tackle sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. So, just one more question, and I don't think I need to pursue this. Specifically, this $3.6 million for the seismic upgrades, would some of the money possibly come from, after some of the other projects are completed, could it come from the parking fund? I mean, from revenues, from the monthly parking fees? I know those are kind of earmarked already. Maybe this is a subject to bring up when we actually start looking at the budget in more detail a few weeks from now.
I can just answer that briefly. At the moment, the parking fund is pretty much operating at a zero balance, and so there just isn't any dollars there to be able to take those projects.
No extra revenues there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
I think you are right in the sense that in the out years, those are anticipated. If funding becomes more available, then absolutely they can be brought forward as the funding becomes available. So in that sense, you're appropriating dollars for a current year and anticipating something in the future year, as you suggested.
Yeah, and then if extra money is available, then these funding not identified projects could be prioritized. I guess it's kind of theoretical to talk about it now since there's funds haven't been identified. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Pryor.
Thanks. I just wanted to get a handle on what our mandate is for this evening. These are all great questions to help create greater understanding about the CIP. And I think what we're in right now is a discussion that looks like we need to make a recommendation to the City Council. And if I'm trying to understand the parameters for that recommendation is, this CIP is your draft to us that says, here's the list of items in order, that is the CIP. And that order meaning some kind of priority. And I've never seen a CIP where the entire list had identified funding, whether it was now or in the future. So that's just something we have to work with. You can only identify funding down to a certain point, and everything below that is unfunded. So in addition to talking about is this order the order we want to recommend to the City Council, and also the sources, which was in the presentation. These are the currently identified sources to cover however far down this list we can get. Do you also want this group to talk about, are those sources adequate, or do we want to recommend to the City Council that they explore additional sources? In other words, the recommendation that this group's going to make to the City Council is both in the list and the sources, if I understand. You want us to recommend, we think the list you've provided us looks reasonable, the order you've put them in, and possibly also, and the sources you've identified are also reasonable and prudent, or do you want us to say, I think you ought to look at this source, or I think you ought to look at that source, or recommend to the City Council that they look at this source or that? Is that kind of what you're seeking from us?
Yes, yes. So in the past, there's been these types of questions about funding and sources, and oftentimes the staff recommendation or the draft is carried forward to council as is. However, you can have those, if there are concerns or other ideas about funding, that could also be part of the recommendation forward to council to look at alternate sources or to even amend the CIP.
Yeah, because when I look at the list, not being an engineer, not being a facilities and operation manager, I look at the list, and unless I have some sort of a policy reason for changing the list, I don't really have a reason for changing the list, because you've created this list based on a whole series of criteria, including level of deterioration, cost, bang for the buck, and a whole series of other factors, plus the limitations of the sources you have available. So an area where I might be able to be of help to you is to say, there's items on this list that don't currently have identified funding that I really would love to see funded, so you either move them up the list or find another source. And I don't know how effective a conversation this evening about additional sources would really be.
And part of that can also be, part of that is that sustainable funding conversation that we're going to be having. So going from a stable place to a sustainable place and looking forward. So some of those unfunded needs that or sources that you would look for, some of those conversations we're having around Parks O&M and the future of the library, and some of those conversations, other projects that are on the multi-year financial plan or are unfunded in the CIP would kind of dovetail into some of those future forward-looking conversations.
So what I would suggest is the first part of your statement of if you put forward the recommendation on here's what we think should be in the FY16 budget, which is really that first part. That next piece is the sustainable budget, which it feels like it might be in the context of all the other potential sustainable budget conversations we might have with libraries, parks. Parking fund's an interesting one. Eventually, it probably talks about downtown parking. We go back and forth on the free, not free. That all plays into this bigger conversation around unfunded needs. So I think my suggestion would be it would be a great conversation, but probably not tonight to try to come to conclusion.
That's what I was trying to get at. What can we accomplish tonight? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. First question, can we turn off that bright light? Next question is there's a man who knows how to do it. Blinding me.
Or just push the power button twice on top.
You can probably just turn it off.
Betty can't.
Next question, is there any chance of replacing the animal shelter? I think that should be a top priority. I've been in that place. I couldn't stand to stay there because it's so pitiful.
Good job.
I think the answer would be if there's a source of monies to do that, absolutely we could replace the animal shelter. The conversation will be is how do we have the revenue or the dollars to do that? There aren't dollars currently within the budget, capital or otherwise, to add that on and then be able to pay for that without choosing to not do something else.
Well, so we could choose to not do something else.
Right, within that funding category, so you couldn't choose to use airport monies to pay for it or transportation money, so it's really in that category probably of just the general fund category, which is, I don't know, $2.3 million or something, whatever that was for the yearly capital, but yeah.
And to be clear, though, we don't have an estimated dollar amount for that project yet either, right?
No, that's.
So it would be hard at this point
$1
to make that
right.
trade-off. Okay.
Maybe we could put it at the airport.
Much.
Only for animals that are traveling.
That's right.
I have another question. The bridges across Amazon Creek, I see that's funded. When will that happen?
Oh, it's shown in the CIP. I can't remember the exact year. I think it was.
Page 173. I think it's where it is.
2018.
Yeah, so it looks like it would be the construction the summer of 2018.
2018. Okay. Thank you.
So Marty and Josh, it sounds like you both have a couple follow-up questions, but I'm going to let Bob go ahead first.
You actually asked my question, and that was regarding the animal shelter, if there had been any consideration as to what might cost be, and I didn't think the staff had gotten anywhere near that, so it's kind of premature to have that question. Procedurally, are we going to have kind of like a round-robin question or comment period at the end tonight?
Well, at this point, the next steps, after we've done any other further questions, is really for us to have a motion, if there is one, to accept the CIP as it stands, and or a motion to accept it with some recommended change. Yeah. And at that point, there may be discussion following that. Yeah. Okay, Marty, did you have another question?
Yeah, actually, comments, as we're all talking about the animal control facility. I know there's people here for whom that's very important. And I say this as the owner of 3 cats, but we don't currently require licensing of cats. Portland does between $8 and $12 a year. So if we did require that, that would establish a funding stream, or we increased modestly the dog licensing fees, that would give an income stream. We're within $30,000 of balancing the animal control budget already. But if we had a surplus, that would give us some basis for perhaps bonding the project out of GO bonds and getting it done. But that's by pet owners, for pet owners, or for irresponsible pet owners, I guess you could say, for the animals. So that was that. My question was about, I mean, I see we're kind of in the out years looking at community centers and aquatic centers. And I guess I would ask, those are typically things that are very difficult to have happen. They had GO bonds listed next to them, but they're very difficult to do without voter-approved bonds. Is there any conversation about that?
Yeah, actually, I mean, in my presentation, I mentioned the system plan work we're doing with recreation and open space now, and so part of that process is taking a look at potential funding options to improve those facilities.
Okay. I mean, it's they're popular big-ticket items, so they're a natural one to look at, voter-approved bonds. Thank you.
Josh, did you have another question?
And this is really, I think, following on Councilor Pryor's sort of framing of the whole task. I guess, I wasn't around for it, but I was really impressed with the revenue team's report from last April, this attempt to look across future funding sources. As I look for the little things to attach to our approval of the CIP, you don't want to make it easy, you don't want to just approve it as is. Little things to attach, I would say, if there's some way for the budget committee and staff or some combination of the right people to work on the points of contact there, I think that's important because I was impressed in looking through, and this was in the presentation as well, at looking at the CIP, how many restricted funding sources there are, and so any discussion of new revenue sources really should be connected with how tricky they are. Can't spend, the dollars come in so many different colors. So that's one piece. The second one, and this is very much, I hope this won't sound like line items because I intend it very much at a policy level, to be a little more explicit somewhere, not maybe right now, but down the road, on the TSP funding piece. I mean, if I sound slightly obsessive about this, it's that I was scarred by the experience of being on the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan Advisory Committee and learning that at our current pace of funding, that project list will be fully funded by like the year 2089 or something like that. And since it's not really an aspirational list, it's something that it's not like window dressing, it actually is fundamentally related to a bunch of city goals on climate, on energy, on livability, and 20-minute neighborhoods, and at the core of Envision Eugene, it would be nice to figure out how that's in here. I fully acknowledge there are a bunch of PBMP listed projects in the CIP, but something that allows us to see, are we on track toward getting that done by 2089 or a little sooner?
May I ask just a follow-up question to that? So when the revenue team, many of their recommendations were about increasing general funding for operational things as opposed to capital things. Is that right? So I just want to make sure we're clear on the tie. Certainly general funding could be allocated to some of this some of these general fund capital opportunities, but a lot of that was also about kind of ongoing operations.
That's true.
So I just want to make sure we are clear about the different pieces of the budget. So. Okay, any other questions? Okay, great.
A question, or was that just a statement? What you said.
You need an answer?
No, I mean, I guess except that there were sort of two suggestions, sort of caveats to our approval. Even the following on the revenue team reports work from last April, and then also getting more transparency about progress toward funding the TSP.
So since we're just a little bit ahead of schedule, let's take a 5-minute stretch break, and then we'll come back for some motions and discussion. Thank you very much all for coming and presenting. What's that?
Don't try harder.
Yeah, please don't. The CIP as presented. Bob?
Move to approve the CIP as presented by city staff.
Okay. Is that second? Second. Great. Okay. So the motion on the table is to approve the CIP as presented by city staff. Any discussion? Bob, would you like to speak to your motion at all?
Yeah, I think the staff, once again, has done great work. I think we started off, obviously, with great news from the city manager. I'm hoping this year we can retire the phrase kicking the can. I hope we never have to talk about Jenga again. I think this is great news that the economy has rebounded enough, and the hard work of the committee over the last couple of years has allowed the staff to put us into a stable budget. I think our task this year is to help build that sustainable budget that we need so much in the future, and that is to continue the work that the revenue team started last year to find additional sources of revenue that are non-punitive, that help the community, and work to strengthen our community. So I think the staff has done a great job with what they've got. Let's work this year to give them more so that we can provide better services and take care of the needs of our community in the future.
Great. Any other discussion about the motion?
Are you running?
Okay.
No.
See no other discussion? We will have a vote. All those in favor of the motion?
Where's the other guy?
Hey, you're late. You're late. It's usually late. I don't know who I think.
Trying there.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's vote on the motion with those we have. So all those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion carries, and we will recommend to City Council that we adopt the CIP as presented by staff. Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to staff for coming and presenting and being willing to answer lots of questions. And I thank Bob for your comments. I think that's very well said that we want to move forward now to utilize some of the great work that's been done over the past couple of years to get us positioned to move from stable to sustainable. So now I just want to make sure everyone is aware of next steps. And so I think Twyla has some dates, or someone's going to pass. Okay, great. Thank you. Some dates for next steps for us as a committee, meeting dates, that kind of thing, so that people can start to look forward on their calendars.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
You can meet as much as you want.
So as the city manager has said, there will be, I believe, a public hearing on the 9th. Is that right? Right? And then city council will meet to adopt the CIP. And these are some additional budget committee meetings that are proposed going forward for our calendar as we head into the spring. So I wanted you to have these so you have the chance to look at these and respond as soon as possible if we have a lot of people who can't make some of these dates.
So, if I understand correctly, we don't have any meetings until April 29th?
That's correct.
Wow.
City council does, but we don't.
Oh.
Right.
I got to pull it together.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Good work, all. We are adjourned. See you in April.
Get well.
Yeah. I'll try and do that by April.
Okay.